Nobody grows tomatoes like this, but it is literally the best way. Can someone tell me why no one is doing this? In the over 7 years that I've been making these YouTube videos, I have had the incredible privilege in being able to talk to thousands of gardeners from all over the world, and what I've learned is it doesn't matter where you are from, it seems that all gardeners are leaving nearly half their tomato harvest on the table. And on today's video, I will share with you this mistake that everyone is making. This technique will nearly double your tomato harvesting window, so you can be harvesting more tomatoes than ever with hardly any additional work.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom apparel and gear.
We gardeners are creatures of habit. We tend to repeat the same pattern year in, year out. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. January arrives, the holidays are over, it's cold, we have cabin fever, and all we can do is be sad. Then, if you're a gardener that likes starting their own seeds, we start seeds like our tomato seeds indoors at some point during February and March. Things finally warm up and we get to transplant our tomatoes out into the garden in April or May. Then, after what feels like forever, we finally get to harvest fresh homegrown tomatoes at some point during the June to September timeframe. Things finally cool off in October and we take a well-deserved break in the cooler fall weather, but then November and December roll around, it gets cold and dark and we get nothing but sad again. For most of us, the best case scenario is that we get to harvest fresh tomatoes from our garden about 4 months a year. But the reality is, for most of us, we don't get to harvest them nearly that long. That's because if you live up north, few tomatoes are actually ripening by June, and if you're like me and you live down in the south, few tomato plants survive our hot summers and hurricane season to make it all the way to September. So in reality, most of us wait all year long for about a 3-month period where we can have incredible homegrown tomatoes, and the other 9 months a year is either legwork trying to make this all happen or straight up wintertime blues. We don't have to accept this. Almost all of us, regardless of climate, can be eating fresh homegrown tomatoes at least 5 to 6 months a year. I don't care if you live in South Florida or northern Wisconsin. You can do this, and it's not even that much extra work. Anyone can easily extend their growing season 4 to 6 weeks both in the spring and in the fall, increasing the length of your tomato harvest an additional 2 to 3 months every single year. I promote this idea every single year, but not enough gardeners are changing their habits and getting on board. I will not rest until this becomes the norm, the thing a majority of backyard gardeners are doing every single year. Today, I'm going to prove to you that this system not only works, but it will change the way you grow tomatoes forever once you try it. Once I started doing this about 8 years ago, I never stopped. In fact, I doubled down on it by growing more plants in total, and I do this on each side of the growing season, both in early spring for an early harvest and a late harvest in the fall all the way until Christmas. The method couldn't be any simpler. Just start a few early determinate or dwarf tomato project tomato seeds in early winter and get them ready for transplanting into containers 60 days before your last frost date. If temperatures are going to be at least 40 degrees during the day, carry the containers outside. If temperatures are going to drop below 40 degrees at night, or if there is any chance of a frost at all, just carry them back inside for protection. I know that that initially may sound like a lot of work, a lot of carrying in and out and back and forth, but please understand that in the springtime, temperatures are working in your favor. Once you are within 60 days of your last spring frost, you are pretty much at the point where temperatures will almost always be above freezing during the day, and once you get within 30 days of your last spring frost, temperatures are typically well above freezing overnight. So in the beginning, those first couple of weeks, you may be carrying them in and out quite a bit, but at that point they will be small and easy to handle at that stage. Once they get larger, temperatures will be such that you will rarely need to carry them in and out anymore. Then in the fall, you follow the same concept, just on a different schedule. You'll start new tomato seeds or root a couple of suckers from a healthy, disease-free tomato plant that you already have growing in your garden, and you'll do this at some point in June or July and get them ready for transplanting into containers at some point in July or August, depending on your climate. The fruits will ripen into late fall, early winter. If you start getting early fall frost at night, either move the containers into a protected location where you are certain they will not get exposed to frost, or carry them indoors or push them into your garage. Keep repeating the process into late fall, early winter until you ripen the entire crop. It's best to do this process with determinate tomatoes or dwarf tomato project tomatoes because most varieties will only grow to be about 24 to 48 inches tall, and they grow as a bush, not as a vine. This makes them very easy to grow in containers as small as 7 gallons, which will stay light and comparatively easy to move. You can do this with any container you want. Fabric grow bags, hard nursery containers, specialty containers like these. It is your choice. If you find them too difficult to move, simply place them on a plant dolly and wheel them around, or place them in a garden cart and you can pull them in and out of your garage, shed, patio, etc. I do this kind of thing with my tomatoes, sensitive citrus trees, and coffee plants during the winter, every winter. The sky is the limit on what plants you can do this with. Earlier this year, I shared with you all exactly how I would be planting my early tomatoes for this season. I decided I was going to try something different as an experiment, where I used these new nifty self-watering containers on wheels with built-in trellises. I thought these were going to be perfect for growing winter tomatoes for an early spring harvest, and I have to say, the results have blown me away. We are only halfway through May. Today is May 18th, and I have already harvested numerous tomatoes off of this Rosella Purple dwarf tomato and this Bobcat determinate tomato. These may be the best results I've had to date growing early tomatoes in containers in terms of the health and vigor of the plants. And I was so thrilled with these results that I had to make this video just to show you all. Before I take you in for a closer look, I will place a link to the original planting video both above and down in the video description if you want to see how I did this and achieved these results. Also, I will place direct links to these exact containers below in the video description if you want to give them a try, as well as links to things like grow bags and the typical nursery containers that I've always used in the past. Now I'm going to take you all in for a closer look and show you how incredibly well these early tomatoes are performing. Remember, today is May 18th. I have already been picking off of these plants for about a week. So these harvests are a full 30 to 45 days before I could ever dream of getting the same harvest out of my garden. And this all came from almost no work at all. All I had to do was wheel these outside during warm days, and a couple of times if it's going to frost or freeze during that early period, I would just wheel them back in. It was that easy. So let's start with the Bobcat. This is a determinate plant, and this entire plant is only about 30 inches tall. Yet I'm getting a huge harvest off of it. First of all, you will notice that the leaves are all disease-free. It is still producing a lot of flowers, and there are a ton of fruits up top. Let's take a look down lower on the plant, and you will notice there is still no disease on this plant, and I actually interplanted it with a basil plant that was working out really well in the beginning, but now the tomato has gotten so vigorous that it has completely shaded out the basil. Look at the huge clusters of fruit on this little determinate tomato plant. You'll see I have more red fruits on there. Let's take a look around the plant. More and more fruits. It's setting fruit everywhere, and in the front we have more tomatoes that are turning. So remember, had I not done this, I would not have any of these tomatoes turning on me. Ooh, look at that big cluster right there. Absolutely beautiful. That is a perfect tomato right there. And there's more turning down there. So just an absolutely gorgeous tomato plant, giving me harvests pretty much a month and a half earlier than had I only abided by my frost date. Now I want to show you my Rosella purple plant. This is a dwarf tomato project plant, and what's incredible is when I grow these in ground in rows, they usually only get to be about 30 inches tall, but in this large container, well, this plant, I've never seen a Rosella purple grow so vigorous. This must be 4.5, 5 feet tall. I had no idea they could get that large, but for whatever reason, they just love this self-watering container, and it is setting absolutely absurd amounts of flowers. This is a tomato that actually likes cool weather, much cooler than most tomatoes, and it struggles in the heat, and usually it does a lot better in the early season than it does in the mid or late season. But this one, well, it is just growing like gangbusters in this trellis. So it really loves this self-watering container, and it has massive amounts of fruits. I mean, look how large this is. This is a dwarf tomato, but they are not dwarf tomato size. And you'll also notice this is a purple tomato. This is almost identical to Cherokee Purple, if you've ever had Cherokee Purple, except I think it's better. It's sweeter, it is more flavorful, and it doesn't have the issues with green shoulders that Cherokee Purple tends to have. This is, next to Brandy Boy, probably my favorite all-time tasting larger tomato. So I would give my top 3 tomatoes to be Brandy Boy, Sun Gold, and this Rosella Purple right here. It is an absolute stunner. And again, look, there's no disease on this plant, which this is a more disease susceptible variety because it tends to do better in the cooler weather, as I said, and it's still setting lots of fruits. So I think this one may be able to produce to me all the way in July. And remember, it's been in this container since basically January, late January, and it is doing incredibly well. I'm just blown away. And I just want to give you a really quick comparison by showing you my tomato garden, where here in the tomato garden, I'm at the mercy of the elements. I can't plant these early. It's based on my frost dates, and we also had a cool spring, so things are a little bit behind. And while these plants are setting fruit, and the fruit clusters are looking fantastic, they are nowhere near the size of mature green stage. So it's going to be a while, at least 4 or 5 weeks, until some of these larger tomatoes that you see back there start ripening their fruit. So while we will eventually have a great harvest on these beautiful plants, we are going to be basing that on Mother Nature's schedule, and because there's just no way to get ahead. So had I not planted any early determinate or dwarf tomatoes in containers to get a jump on the season, I would just have to patiently wait until probably mid to late June, maybe even early July, for a lot of these tomatoes to actually have mature fruit. And for those of you that are north of me or well inland, you will be waiting even longer since you plant your tomatoes later than me. So again, we have a lot to look forward to, but believe me when I tell you, it's way better to be picking homegrown tomatoes in May and June and July and August, and have that continue all the way until nearly Christmas. This is the thing that almost every gardener should be doing, yet almost none of them are every single year. I want this to become the cultural norm. I want it to be totally commonplace for everybody to grow a handful of early tomatoes. Remember, there is no reason to grow a dozen different plants here. We only need to grow 1 or 2. Something easy that we can handle and shuffle them in and out as the weather allows us to do so, and get a jump start on the season. Because otherwise, most of us are only going to have fresh homegrown tomatoes, what, 2 to 3 months a year, if we're lucky, somewhere around 90 days. I mean, that is just not enough. And by simply having just a couple of early tomato plants that are easy to grow, that we can shuffle in and out, we can be harvesting the tomatoes easily a month and a half early. So normally, my tomato season here in North Carolina would be somewhere from June to October, if I don't have a bad hurricane season, oftentimes even shorter. But because I do this, it is more like May to December. So I am literally harvesting fresh tomatoes at least 6 months a year, sometimes the majority of the year. And I know you can too if you follow this simple technique. So if this video inspired you and you want to try growing tomatoes in containers this fall so you can have harvests all the way into the winter, I strongly recommend you start your seeds at least 4 months before your first fall frost, if not 4.5 months, because you want to get them to be about 6 to 8 week mature transplants that go into the containers about 2.5 months before your first frost in the fall. That's because the fall is going to work against you. The days and nights are going to get cooler, the day lengths are going to truncate, so you're going to get less solar energy, and you're going to find that your tomatoes grow a lot more slowly in the fall than they do in the spring. That is the real key to having successful fall tomatoes. You kind of need to get a big jump on them because people don't factor in the shrinking days. So those days to maturity that you see on the seed packets, they are actually longer when you grow fall tomatoes. Now, if you don't want to start them from seed, you can take a sucker as a cutting off of a tomato plant, and you can stick that in some moist potting mix. That sucker will root in a warm, humid environment out of direct sunlight in about 10 to 14 days. So that's what I did right here, or you can start seed fresh. It's going to take longer to start the seeds because they're going to have to germinate. Similarly, if you want to try this again during the spring, make sure that you have mature transplants ready to go into containers 60 days before your first frost date. So that means you are probably going to have to start your tomatoes about 4 months before your first frost date, which is often like 2 months before you would normally start your typical tomatoes. That is how you want to get a jump start on the new growing season. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring the notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products I featured in this video, like these containers right here, I placed direct links to all of them down in the video description. For everything else I use in real life in my garden, they are all linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. So expand the video description, click on the Amazon storefront link, and you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support my channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Well, it's the 15th of the month, and it is time for Dale's monthly heartworm preventative. There is nothing more important if you have a pup than to get them on a monthly heartworm preventative, because all it takes to get heartworms is getting bitten by one infected mosquito, and the mosquitoes are starting here in North Carolina. Now, we keep them on this every single month of the year because you could always get a mosquito bite. And we used to work a lot with a shelter for years, and we got so many dogs that were heartworm positive. About half of them that would come in would be heartworm positive, and we lost many dogs to heartworms, unfortunately. And what's even worse is, well, not even worse, but what's also terrible is, even if you catch heartworms and you put them on treatment, well, the simple act of a dog getting excited and their heart pounding from excitement can kill them. So they weren't allowed to go for walks. They weren't allowed to go play. They basically had to be in solitary confinement for many months with no stimulation because their heart would be so damaged from all the holes the heartworms would make that basically you had to wait 3 to 6 months for the heart to repair itself, and the dogs weren't allowed to have any kind of stimulation during that time really and get excited. So it was basically torture for the dogs. So the only way to make sure that your dog is safe and happy and healthy and doesn't have any nasty fartworms is to get them on a preventative. So we just wanted to give this little monthly public service announcement, right, Mr. Handsome? We love you.